Hello, and welcome to G Fun Facts Online. The 20th century was an age of wonders, of flight and film and computers, but it was also an age of unimaginable horror. 2 world wars, genocides, and mass atrocities on a scale never seen before. In the face of this darkness, a radical new idea began to take shape. What if the most powerful people on the planet, the leaders who order invasions and orchestrations of mass murder, could be put on trial? What if we could hold individuals, not just nations, accountable for the worst crimes imaginable? This is the story of that idea, the story of international criminal courts, and the long, difficult journey to forge justice out of the ashes of war. Our story begins after World War I. The Treaty of Versailles actually included plans to prosecute the German Emperor Wilhelm II for a supreme offense against international morality. It was a revolutionary thought, but it fizzled out. The emperor found asylum, and the trials never really happened. But the seed was planted. Then came World War II. The Holocaust, the systematic murder of 6 million Jews and millions of other victims, was a crime so vast it demanded a new kind of response. Some leaders, like Winston Churchill, wanted to just execute the top Nazis, but the United States argued for a trial, a legal process, to document the crimes and establish a new principle for the world. This led to the Nuremberg trials. In 1945, for the first time in history, the leaders of a sovereign nation were put in the dock before an international tribunal. They weren't just accused of starting a war. The indictment included a new charge, a concept that would change everything: crimes against humanity. This covered murder, extermination, and enslavement against any civilian population. The chief American prosecutor, Robert H. Jackson, made a declaration that echoes to this day. He said, "Crimes against international law are committed by men, not by abstract entities, and only by punishing individuals who commit such crimes can the provisions of international law be enforced." This was the birth of individual criminal responsibility. You could no longer hide behind the flag or your official title. If you committed the crime, you were responsible. The Nuremberg trials were monumental. 19 high-ranking Nazi officials were convicted, and the world saw mountains of evidence detailing their atrocities. In the Far East, a similar court, the Tokyo Tribunal, prosecuted Japan's wartime leaders. Now, these trials weren't perfect. Critics called them victor's justice, since the judges were all from the winning Allied nations. And some legal scholars questioned prosecuting people for crimes that weren't fully codified in international law before they were committed. But despite the criticisms, Nuremberg and Tokyo set a powerful precedent. They established that justice could and should reach across borders. After these trials, however, the momentum stalled. The Cold War divided the world, making the cooperation needed for international justice impossible. For nearly 50 years, the idea lay dormant. Then, in the early 1990s, the world watched in horror as 2 new nightmares unfolded. In the former Yugoslavia, the term ethnic cleansing entered our vocabulary as brutal conflicts tore the region apart. And in Rwanda, in the span of just 100 days, an estimated 800,000 people, mostly from the Tutsi minority, were systematically slaughtered. The global conscience was shocked, and the United Nations was spurred to act. This led to the creation of what are called the ad hoc tribunals. First, in 1993, the International Criminal Tribunal for the former Yugoslavia, or ICTY, was set up in The Hague. Its job was to prosecute the masterminds of the Balkan Wars. It indicted 161 people, including heads of state like Serbian President Slobodan Milosevic. The ICTY's work was groundbreaking. It made crucial rulings that helped define modern international law. For example, it officially ruled that the massacre of over 7,000 Bosnian Muslim men and boys at Srebrenica was an act of genocide. It also prosecuted sexual violence as a weapon of war, recognizing rape as a form of torture and a crime against humanity. A year later, in 1994, the UN established the International Criminal Tribunal for Rwanda, the ICTR. This court delivered the first ever conviction for genocide by an international tribunal. The man convicted, Jean-Paul Akayesu, was a small-town mayor, proving that responsibility reached all levels. And in a landmark judgment, the court also ruled that rape could be an act of genocide. The Rwandan tribunal even convicted media figures who had used radio broadcasts to incite hatred and violence, a vital precedent in our age of mass media. But these tribunals were temporary, created for specific conflicts. They showed that international justice could work, but they also highlighted the need for something more, a permanent, independent court that could step in whenever and wherever future atrocities occurred. That dream became a reality on July 17, 1998, when 120 countries signed the Rome Statute, the treaty that created the International Criminal Court, or the ICC. The ICC opened its doors in The Hague in 2002. It's the world's first and only permanent international court for prosecuting the Big Four international crimes: genocide, crimes against humanity, war crimes, and the crime of aggression. A key feature of the ICC is the principle of complementarity. This is a fancy way of saying the ICC is a court of last resort. It only steps in when a country's own legal system is unwilling or unable to genuinely prosecute these horrific crimes. The court's first trial convicted a Congolese warlord, Thomas Lubanga, for the war crime of using child soldiers. But its most high-profile cases show both its power and its limits. In 2009, it issued an arrest warrant for Omar al-Bashir, then the sitting president of Sudan, for genocide in Darfur. It was a huge step, but Bashir has never been arrested. This highlights the ICC's biggest weakness. It has no police force. It completely relies on countries to cooperate, to make arrests, and hand over suspects. In another case, the ICC tried the former president of Côte d'Ivoire, Laurent Gbagbo. He was eventually acquitted, which, while frustrating for victims, showed the court was impartial and not just a rubber stamp for the prosecution. And then, in March 2023, the ICC did something that sent shockwaves around the world. It issued an arrest warrant for a sitting head of a permanent UN Security Council member, Russian President Vladimir Putin, for the alleged war crime of unlawfully deporting Ukrainian children. This single act demonstrated the court's willingness to challenge even the most powerful figures on the world stage. But this brings us to the challenges and criticisms, which are significant. The ICC has been accused of bias, with many of its early investigations focused on Africa, leading some African nations to threaten to withdraw. And its legitimacy is constantly undermined by the fact that some of the world's most powerful countries, including the United States, China, and Russia, are not members. They haven't signed the Rome Statute, so the court has no jurisdiction over them unless the UN Security Council, where they hold veto power, refers a case. The process is also incredibly slow and expensive. After 2 decades and billions of dollars, the court has only secured a handful of convictions. But we can't forget the human side of all this. These courts aren't just about legal principles. They are about people. They provide a platform for victims and witnesses to tell their stories, to have their suffering acknowledged on a global stage. This testimony is not only vital evidence, it creates an undeniable historical record, a bulwark against denial. At the same time, a core principle is the right of the accused to a fair trial. They have the presumption of innocence and the right to a robust defense. This is crucial. It ensures these are legitimate legal proceedings, not show trials, and that justice, not revenge, is the ultimate goal. So what is the future of international justice? The journey is far from over. The system is imperfect, politically constrained, and often frustratingly slow. But from a radical idea floated after World War I to a permanent court challenging a global superpower, the progress is undeniable. The work of these courts is a testament to a global, collective effort to ensure that the perpetrators of the worst imaginable crimes cannot count on impunity. It's a declaration that humanity's laws and moral standards must apply to everyone, everywhere, no matter how powerful. As Martin Luther King Jr. said, the arc of the moral universe is long, but it bends toward justice. The messy, difficult, and essential work of international criminal courts is a vital part of bending that arc. Thanks for listening to Fun Facts Online.